A reading from 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 18 through 25. For the message about the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since, in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, God decided, through the foolishness of proclamation, to save those who believe. For Jews demand signs, and Greeks desire wisdom, but we proclaim Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God, and the wisdom of God. For God's foolishness is wiser than human wisdom, and God's weakness is stronger than human strength. We have a narcissism problem, and apparently always have. The more time that I spend with Paul's letter to the Corinthians, I become more impressed with their ability to presage the struggles of the modern church. One of the core pillars of the conflict between Paul and the Corinthian church centers on authority, or, more to the point, does Paul really have authority? Here in 1 Corinthians 1, Paul pushes back against their expectations of what a teacher of great truth will look like. He chides the Greeks for wanting their great and eloquent debaters, as it says in verse 20, Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? As a city connected to a couple of different ports of call, Corinth, in particular, got a lot of these great philosophical speakers passing through, and it seems that the Corinthian congregation has found their own more debonair, better-spoken, expectation-meeting teacher, Apollos. He gave the upper-class portion of the Corinthian congregation what they wanted: eloquence, credentials, and all the correct cultural hallmarks. Everyone, even Paul, seemed to agree that Paul may have been a great writer, but not a great speaker. He brings this up in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 6. I may be untrained in speech, but not in knowledge. Certainly in every way and in all things we have made this evident to you. Instead, he makes the point that it shouldn't matter. Throughout the letters, and certainly here in 1 Corinthians 1, Paul challenges the Corinthians to turn their eyes away from cultural expectations and instead seek the deeper, more paradoxical truth, as he brings up in verses 23 through 25. But we proclaim Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles, but to those who are called, both Jews and Greek, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For God's foolishness is wiser than human wisdom, and God's weakness is stronger than human strength. God's wisdom doesn't rely on humans rising to expectations. A crucified body typically signifies defeat at the hands of the Romans. Turn this imperial torture device into a hallmark of salvation and triumph reveals God's transforming power to push far beyond the normal logic of this world and reveal a far greater power. Still, the Corinthians want this power related in the normal wrapper with all the correct trappings of Greek success. We keep stepping on this particular rake as well, to our own detriment. Flash forward a couple of thousand years, and we still want our religious teachers to radiate the aura of success. Only the nature of said aura has changed in the intervening centuries. We no longer seek Greek eloquence. 21st century church judges its truth speakers on how big a crowd they can draw. We essentially say to pastors, by all means speak the truth of God, but do so in a way that brings the numbers. To truly succeed, it matters less how true one's message might be, and more how many bottoms will place themselves in seats to hear it. We cheerfully ignore that the largest crowd sizes in the New Testament top out at a handful of thousand, and that Jesus and the early apostles spent most of their lives working with individuals and small groups. Just like our Corinthian forebears, we carefully avoid the reality that none of the heroes in the New Testament, Jesus included, ever looked particularly successful. In the economy, companies make the profits go up. In church world, the pastor makes the number of attendees go up. Surely a message with so many people responding to it must be true and blessed and divine wisdom. It is. Sometimes. Maybe even most of the time. But occasionally, we hand the keys of the kingdom over to people who are far better at getting the numbers than speaking the truth. Secular press can feel quick to jump all over the latest megachurch pastor with the moral failing, toxic church culture, cultish levels of control over their members, misappropriation of funds, or the ranting of toxic, hateful, and insane things from God's pulpit. But our church cultures made them possible. Just in the past month, Aaron Ivey, now former worship pastor of Austin Stone Community Church, had to step down because of inappropriate and explicit communications with congregants and predatory manipulation of a minor. This guy had all the trappings. A write-up in the Washington Post, a successful podcast, on top of a front-facing role at a huge congregation. Too often, to count, we tolerate the behavior because these folks sure can draw a crowd. And only stop when it becomes too obvious or the blowback becomes too intense. When the desire for church leadership boils down to an ability to project earthly success, we make ourselves vulnerable to some downright earthly results. These guys committed their own sins, and to the Corinthians' credit, Apollos seems to have been preaching God's truth. They simply failed to recognize truth in a less successful looking vessel, and we got so obsessed with bigness that we equate it with truth. Mike Cosper reaches this conclusion by the end of his investigative podcast into the failings and excesses of Mark Driscoll, The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill. He points out our collective guilt for wanting big, not always caring how we got there, and setting people like Driscoll up to wreak havoc. Cosper also opens every episode of the show with a recognition that the story of Mars Hill, and by extension the Church Universal, is, quote, also about the mystery of God working in broken places, end quote. Thank God that the foolish, paradoxical wisdom of God breaks through even our love of earthly success. In the places where we let the brokenness lead, God weaves in redemption. That doesn't get us off the hook. I wrestle with this a lot. I got where I am in life, in part on the back of my ability to entertain a crowd. I've been doing that my whole life. I only started preaching like 10 years ago. For me, it's a constant spiritual discipline that I don't always succeed at, to hold myself accountable to seek to speak truth, and not just put on a show. To remember that God does the real work, and to reject the idea that I'm defined by my crowd size. For us all, we need to keep in mind that one of the greatest writers of Christian truth of all time, Paul, had to defend his bona fides because he didn't look successful. That we would probably pass him by for similar reasons. That our key symbol of faith is a Roman execution method. God's wisdom doesn't look right in our eyes because we need God to help give us better eyes.